I don't need your heart, Magret. I just need your signature on this marriage license, Campbell Huber said, his voice as cold as the marble beneath their feet. Magret Jackson clutched her worn, damp coat, her eyes reflecting a desperate, hollow exhaustion. And in return, I get a roof over my head. No questions asked. No debts. None, he agreed, sliding the heavy fountain pen across the polished mahogany desk. It was a transaction, a simple, frigid contract. But as she signed her name, neither realized the tempest they had just invited into their lives. Magret Jackson stood under the flickering neon light of a closed bodega, her worldly possessions reduced to a single canvas duffel bag. At 28, she had hit the absolute bottom. An eviction, a string of bad luck, and a mountain of medical debt left behind by a fractured family had finally broken her. She was shivering, hungry, and entirely out of options. Across town, in a penthouse that looked down upon the miserable streets like a fortress, Campbell Huber was facing a different kind of ruin. Campbell was the heir apparent to the Borges Huber shipping empire, a titan of industry known for his stoic demeanor and ruthless efficiency. But his grandmother, the eccentric and iron-willed founder Benigna Borges, had left a ticking time bomb in her will. Benigna had decreed that Campbell could only assume full control of the board and his multi-billion-dollar inheritance if he were married by his 35th birthday. If he failed, the controlling shares would default to his half-brother, Philippe Duhamel, a man whose ambition was matched only by his profound lack of morality. Campbell had exactly 3 days left. Their worlds collided not by fate, but by cold calculation. Campbell had tasked his legal team to find a candidate. Someone desperate, someone without ties, someone who could be bought for a quiet, temporary arrangement. Magret's name surfaced through a bankruptcy attorney's discarded files. When Campbell's black town car idled beside her in the rain, Magret thought she was hallucinating. When he offered her a warm car and a hot coffee, she thought she was being abducted. When he laid out the contract in his sterile, immaculate office an hour later, she realized she was simply being hired. 2 years, Campbell stated, his dark eyes betraying zero emotion. He sat perfectly rigid, his tailored suit a stark contrast to her soaked, threadbare sweater. You will live in the west wing of my estate. You will attend public functions as my wife. You will have a generous allowance, and at the end of the term, a severance package of $2 million. In exchange, you will not embarrass me. You will not ask questions about my business, and you will not expect a real marriage. Magret stared at the gleaming mahogany table. Pride was a luxury she had lost months ago. The warmth of the office was seeping into her bones, making her eyelids heavy. She thought of the cold streets, the terrifying uncertainty of the next morning. I need a place to stay tonight, she said, her voice raspy but surprisingly steady. The housekeeper is already preparing your suite, Campbell replied. Magret picked up the pen. The scratch of the nib against the thick parchment sounded like the locking of a vault door. She had sold her freedom for a sanctuary, trading the brutal unpredictability of the streets for the gilded cage of the Huber Empire. As she was escorted to the estate, Campbell remained behind, staring out at the city skyline. He had secured his legacy. He had defeated Philippe, or so he arrogantly thought, underestimating the sheer venom of the enemies lurking in his own bloodline. The Huber estate was a sprawling monolith of stone and glass, beautiful but entirely devoid of warmth. Magret's introduction to her new life was overseen by Deborah Andrews, the head housekeeper. Deborah was a woman constructed entirely of sharp angles and starch, her eyes missing nothing. Mr. Huber prefers quiet in the mornings. You are to use the secondary staircase if you leave your wing before 8, Deborah instructed, leading Magret through hallways lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors. I'm not exactly prone to throwing morning raves, Mrs. Andrews, Magret muttered, exhausted. Deborah paused, offering a microscopic narrowing of her eyes. You are not what I expected, Miss Jackson. I'm not what I expected either, Magret replied honestly. For the first few weeks, Campbell and Magret lived like ghosts haunting the same mansion. They passed in the hallways with curt nods. They ate dinner at opposite ends of a ridiculously long dining table, the silence deafening. Magret felt like an imposter, drowning in silk sheets and catered meals, her past trauma making her restless in the opulent safety. But the isolation was shattered on a Tuesday evening when Philippe Duhamel arrived unannounced, accompanied by his wife, Suzanne Nascimento. Philippe was devastatingly handsome, with a predatory smile that never quite reached his eyes. Suzanne was a former model, draped in haute couture and a suffocating aura of superiority. They had come to inspect the miracle bride who had thwarted their path to the Borges-Huber throne. "So, this is the lovely Maigret," Philippe purred, cornering her in the drawing room while Campbell was on a call. He circled her like a shark. "Campbell kept you awfully hidden. Tell me, where did my dear brother find such a unique jewel?" "We met through mutual acquaintances," Maigret lied smoothly, reciting the backstory Campbell's PR team had drilled into her. Suzanne scoffed, sipping her champagne. She looked Maigret up and down, her gaze lingering on Maigret's slightly misaligned collar. "Mutual acquaintances? Fascinating. You don't strike me as someone who runs in our circles, darling. Your posture screams public transit." Maigret felt the familiar sting of humiliation, the same feeling she had when debt collectors pounded on her door. But this wasn't the street. This was her house now, legally speaking. A spark of dormant fire ignited in her chest. "And your manners, Suzanne," screamed New Money trying too hard. Maigret fired back, her voice quiet but razor-sharp. The silence that followed was absolute. Philippe's smile froze. Suzanne gasped, her perfectly painted lips parting in shock. From the doorway, Campbell stood motionless. He had heard the exchange. For the first time since they met, a genuine expression crossed his face, a fleeting, almost imperceptible look of amusement. He stepped into the room, smoothly placing a hand on the small of Maigret's back. "Is there a problem here, Philippe?" Campbell asked, his tone dangerously soft. "Just getting to know my new sister-in-law," Philippe recovered, his eyes flashing with raw hatred. "She has quite the bite." "Only when cornered," Campbell replied, steering Maigret away. That night, the dynamic shifted. Neither spoke of the incident, but the ice had cracked. Maigret realized Campbell was surrounded by vipers, fighting a war he couldn't win alone, and Campbell realized he hadn't just hired a prop. He had brought a fighter into his home. The Borges Foundation Charity Gala was to be their first public debut, an event that required Maigret to wear a diamond necklace worth more than every neighborhood she had ever lived in combined. The anxiety gnawed at her as she sat in her expansive dressing room. The silk of her midnight blue gown felt heavy, like armor she didn't know how to wield. She wasn't an heiress. She was a survivor, and tonight, the world's most critical eyes would be searching for the seams in her disguise. She struggled with the clasp of the diamond necklace, her hands shaking so violently the gems rattled against her collarbone. Suddenly, Campbell's reflection appeared in the mirror behind her. He wore a tailored tuxedo that made him look like a dark, unyielding prince, radiating an intimidating calm. "Allow me," he murmured. His large, warm hands brushed against the sensitive skin of her neck, sending an unexpected, electric shiver down her spine. The sharp click of the clasp was loud in the quiet room. He didn't pull away immediately. Instead, his eyes met hers in the glass. "You are trembling." "I don't belong here, Campbell. I don't know the first thing about high society. They're going to eat me alive," she confessed, her voice thick with genuine panic. The facade she had maintained for weeks was crumbling. He turned her around, his hands resting lightly but firmly on her bare shoulders. The physical contact was grounding. "They only have power if you grant it to them, Maigret. You handled Suzanne easily enough. Tonight, you aren't Maigret from the streets. You are Maigret Huber, and my wife bows to no one." It was the first time he had referred to her as his wife with any kind of conviction. The words acted as an anchor, pulling her back from the edge of a panic attack. The limousine ride to the venue was silent, but the air was thick with a new, unspoken solidarity. When they arrived, the flash of paparazzi cameras was blinding. Campbell instinctively placed a protective hand on her lower back, guiding her through the chaotic gauntlet and into the grand ballroom. The gala was a glittering sea of hypocrisy. The room smelled of expensive perfume, imported orchids, and raw ambition. Every smile hid a dagger. Every compliment was an interrogation. Philippe and Suzanne were already holding court by the ice sculptures, subtly seeding rumors about Maigret's mysterious background to anyone who would listen. They orchestrated it perfectly, ensuring that when Maigret stepped into the room on Campbell's arm, all eyes turned to her with predatory curiosity. Campbell, sensing the shift in the room, didn't shy away. He led her straight to the center of the dance floor as the orchestra began a waltz. "Keep your eyes on me," he whispered as he pulled her close. "Let them start." As they moved, perfectly in sync despite never having practiced, Maigret felt the armor settling into place. She wasn't just surviving, she was performing. During the extravagant six-course dinner, the attacks became verbal. An influential board member named Mr. Vance, heavily aligned with Philippe's faction, leaned aggressively across the table. The surrounding guests fell dead silent, waiting for the bloodletting. "Tell us, Mrs. Huber," Vance drawled, swirling his wine. "Which charity do you champion? We haven't seen your family name on any philanthropic registries. You must have deep roots in some cause or another." It was a trap, designed to highlight her lack of pedigree. Suzanne smirked openly from across the room, anticipating the stuttering ruin of Campbell's new bride. Maigret took a slow, deliberate sip of water, feeling Campbell tense rigidly beside her. She didn't use the sterilized PR script they had practiced. She looked Vance dead in the eye. "I champion the unseen, Mr. Vance," Maigret said, her voice carrying clearly over the clinking silver. "I champion the people who work 3 jobs and still can't afford rent, the people crushed by insurmountable medical debt while corporations report record quarterly profits. I champion them because I know what it means to be them. The Foundation's focus should not just be on galas that pat us on the back, but on the streets we actively step over to get here." A stunned, suffocating silence fell over the table. It was a massive faux pas in high society to acknowledge actual, grinding poverty. Several dowagers gasped, but Maigret didn't flinch. She kept her chin high. Campbell looked at her, his usual impassive mask slipping completely to reveal a profound, startling admiration. A slow smile touched his lips. He raised his crystal glass. To the unseen, he toasted smoothly, his voice ringing with authority. The table, forced by Campbell's sheer gravitational pull and power, hastily raised their glasses and muttered the toast. Philippe's jaw clenched so hard a muscle twitched violently in his cheek. Later, seeking air, Maigret slipped out onto the darkened terrace. Campbell found her a few minutes later, leaning against the stone balustrade, looking out at the sprawling city lights below. "You went completely off script," he said, stepping up beside her. "I can't pretend to be one of them, Campbell. I won't. It makes my skin crawl," she admitted, rubbing her arms against the evening chill. He didn't reprimand her. Instead, he smoothly took off his tuxedo jacket and draped it over her shivering shoulders. The fabric was warm and smelled of cedar and expensive cologne. "It was the most honest thing anyone has said in that room in a decade," he said softly. They stood in comfortable silence, the vast space between them suddenly feeling less like a contractual boundary and more like a bridge. The cold transaction of their marriage was fading, replaced by a tentative, fragile, and very real respect. The enemy, humiliated by the failure at the gala, did not rest. Philippe knew he couldn't break Campbell through legitimate business maneuvers. Campbell was too smart for that. So, he decided to break the marriage. He hired Oswald Rising, a morally bankrupt corporate lawyer with a legendary talent for unearthing buried bones. Oswald was a relentless hound. He dug past the PR walls, bypassed the carefully constructed narratives, and found the dirt he was looking for in the forgotten archives of a suburban courthouse. It started on a gloomy Thursday afternoon. Maigret, feeling a pang of homesickness for her old life, had invited her only friend, Stephanie Anderson, to the estate for tea. Stephanie had been Maigret's lifeline during her darkest days, but Stephanie was deeply flawed, prone to terrible decisions, chaotic relationships, and crippling gambling debts. Sitting in the manicured gardens, Stephanie looked wildly out of place, her nervous energy a stark contrast to the serene, ancient oak. While they were reminiscing over porcelain teacups, Campbell walked into his private study to find an ambush. Philippe and Oswald were waiting for him. Deborah, the housekeeper, stood by the door, her face a mask of grim, pale concern. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Campbell demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous octave. Oswald smirked, casually tossing a thick, heavy manila folder onto the center of Campbell's pristine desk. "Consider it a public service, Mr. Huber, a comprehensive background check on your beloved bride." It seems she neglected to mention a few vital chapters of her history. Campbell opened the folder, his eyes scanning the top page. Inside were police reports, eviction notices, and a documented history of grand larceny firmly connected to Maigret Jackson's name. "She's a grifter, Campbell," Philippe sneered, pouring himself a generous measure of scotch from Campbell's private cart. 3 years ago, she was implicated in an embezzlement scheme at a mid-level logistics firm. The criminal charges were eventually dropped on a technicality, but she took the money. "She's playing you, brother." She found a billionaire mark and she sank her teeth in deep. Campbell stared at the documents, the dates, the names, The damning witness statements, it was all there in black and white. He felt a cold, dark fury rising in his chest, suffocating the air from his lungs. He wasn't just angry because he had been played. He was devastated because, for the first time in his isolated, guarded life, he had started to let someone in. He had begun to care for Margaret. He had begun to admire her. He marched out of the study and into the garden. The sight of Margaret laughing freely with Stephanie, a woman whose ragged appearance only seemed to confirm Oswald's narrative, fueled his blinding rage. "Margaret, my office." "Now," he barked, not caring who heard. The confrontation in the study was brutal and swift. As soon as the heavy oak doors closed, Campbell threw the file violently at her feet. The papers scattered across the Persian rug like dead leaves. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" he roared, his usual stoicism entirely shattered. "Did you think you could just play the tragic, noble victim while hiding the fact that you were stealing from your previous employers?" Margaret looked down at the scattered papers. She saw the police letterhead. The color instantly drained from her face, leaving her ghost white. She looked up at Campbell, seeing the absolute, unadulterated disgust in his eyes. It felt like a knife twisting in her gut. "Campbell, please, it's not what it looks like," she pleaded, her voice breaking. She reached out, but he stepped back as if her touch were toxic. "Don't lie to me," he shouted, slamming his fist onto the mahogany desk with a force that rattled the pens. "It's a matter of public record. You were indicted for grand larceny." "I took the fall," she screamed back, the tears she had sworn never to shed in this house finally spilling over. "I took the fall for Stephanie. She had a toddler, Campbell. She was going to go to federal prison because she stole from the petty cash to pay off a violent loan shark who threatened to hurt her kid. I had no one. I had nothing to lose. So I took the blame to save a mother and her child." Campbell froze, the raw desperation in her voice piercing through his anger. But the poison of Philippe's words had already seeped too deeply into his veins. His billionaire instincts, the paranoia that everyone wanted something from him, took over. "Why should I believe a single word you say?" Campbell asked, his voice dropping to a cruel, icy whisper. "Our entire marriage is a lie, built on a financial contract. You were bought and paid for. Why should your past be any different?" The words struck her like physical blows. The fragile, beautiful connection they had begun to build shattered into fine dust. Margaret stopped crying. She drew herself up, her spine straightening as the survivor in her took over. Her pride, battered but not broken, returned. "You're right," she said, her voice turning as cold and empty as the marble halls of his mansion. "It was just a transaction. I'll have my bags packed by morning." She turned on her heel and walked out, leaving Campbell standing alone in the ruins of his office, a hollow victory tasting like ash and profound regret in his mouth. Margaret didn't leave the next morning. She packed her duffel bag, zipped it shut, and sat on the edge of her lavish bed, staring out at the waking city. A profound, seismic realization hit her. For her entire life, she had run. She had taken the hits, absorbed the blame for others, and fled into the shadows. But not this time. Philippe and Oswald had come into her sanctuary, intending to destroy the only stable ground she had ever found, and they were using her trauma as a weapon against the man she was falling in love with. She wasn't going to be a victim anymore. She was going to be a nightmare. Before dawn, dressed in dark jeans and a nondescript hoodie, she snuck out of the West Wing. She knew the security patrols by now, timing her movements to bypass the cameras in the courtyard. She didn't flee to the streets. She took a cab deep into the grimy, neglected corners of the city's financial district. If Philippe was using a dirty lawyer, she needed someone who played even dirtier. She needed someone who hated Oswald Rising with a burning passion. Through her old street connections, she found Honoré Senga. Honoré was a brilliant, disgraced forensic accountant who had been professionally ruined by Oswald's smear campaigns years ago. He operated out of a damp, windowless basement, surrounded by humming servers, empty energy drink cans, and profound paranoia. "I need you to look into Philippe Duhamel and Oswald Rising," Margaret told him, placing a thick stack of cash, her entire accumulated allowance, on his cluttered, sticky desk. "They're trying to take down Campbell Huber using me as the wedge. I know they're dirty. I can smell it on them. I just need you to prove it." Honoré's eyes gleamed with a manic, obsessive energy as he looked at the cash, then at her. "Oh, sweetheart, they aren't just dirty. Men like that are a walking biohazard. Give me 48 hours. For 3 agonizing days, Margaret lived a high-stakes double life. By day, She remained locked in her suite at the estate, refusing to see Campbell or answer his knocks, letting him marinate in his guilt and anger. By night, she worked tirelessly in Honoré's basement, alongside a highly remorseful Stephanie, who used her old grifter connections to sweet-talk low-level clerks into pulling restricted shipping manifests and offshore account routing numbers. Meanwhile, back at the estate, Campbell was drowning in his own misery. Without Magrette's quiet presence, the massive house felt like a suffocating tomb. Unable to sleep, he reviewed the police file Oswald had provided, line by agonizing line. The inconsistencies began to bother him. He fired his corporate PI firm for being too slow and hired an independent Black Ops investigator to look into Stephanie Anderson. Within 48 hours, the investigator delivered a secure drive to Campbell. The truth was undeniable. Court transcripts, loan shark records, and Stephanie's own past confessions painted a clear picture. Magrette's story was entirely true. She had sacrificed her own clean record and future to save a desperate mother and a child. She wasn't a thief. She was profoundly, fiercely, almost self-destructively loyal. The guilt hit Campbell like a physical blow to the chest. He had become exactly the thing he despised. He had become like Philippe, judging, arrogant, and cruel. On the fourth night, unable to bear it a second longer, Campbell knocked on Magrette's door. When she finally opened it, she looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes. But her posture was resolute. "I was wrong," Campbell said immediately, the words tearing out of his throat before she could shut the door. The great titan of industry, humbled and raw. "I investigated. I know the absolute truth about Stephanie. Magrette, I am so deeply, unforgivably sorry." Magrette looked at him, searching his dark eyes. She saw the genuine pain and self-loathing there. She didn't say a word, but she stepped aside, letting him into her sanctuary. Campbell walked in and froze. The massive king-sized bed was completely covered in printed spreadsheets, banking, routing numbers, highlighted offshore account details, and surveillance photographs. It looked like a war room. He frowned, his business instincts flaring as he looked at the chaos. "Magrette, what is all this?" "This," Magrette said, walking over and pointing a slender finger to a aggressively highlighted column of numbers, "is irrefutable proof that Philippe and Oswald have been embezzling millions from the Borges Huber European subsidiaries for the last 4 years. They've been funneling the money through dummy corporations registered in Luxembourg, all tied back to Suzanne Nascimento's maiden name." Campbell stared at the documents, his brilliant mind rapidly racing as he connected the data points. The sheer audacity of it. The massive scale of the theft happening right under the board's nose. He looked up from the papers to Magrette, entirely awestruck by the woman standing before him. "You didn't run," he whispered, reverence heavy in his voice. "I told you," she said, her eyes flashing with a dangerous, beautiful defiance. "I'm done running." He didn't think. He just acted. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled her fiercely into his arms, burying his face in the crook of her neck. It wasn't a calculated move. It was a desperate, overwhelming need. Magrette stiffened in surprise for a second, then melted against him, her hands gripping the fabric of his shirt as if she were drowning, and he was the raft. "We're going to destroy them," Campbell murmured fiercely against her skin. "I know," she replied, holding him tighter. "I've already drafted the battle plans." The emergency board meeting was called by Philippe. He strutted into the glass-walled boardroom on the top floor of the Huber Tower, practically vibrating with victory. Suzanne sat in the gallery, her chin held high, ready to watch her husband take the throne. Oswald Rising sat at the legal table, organizing his papers with smug precision. Campbell sat at the head of the table. His face was unreadable. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Philippe began, his voice echoing in the large room. "It is with a heavy heart that I must bring to light the unstable and fraudulent nature of my brother's recent marriage, a marriage required by our late grandmother's will. As I will prove today, this union is a sham, rendering Campbell ineligible to hold the controlling shares." He gestured to Oswald, who stood up. "We have evidence of Miss Jackson's criminal past. Save your breath." "Oswald," a female voice rang out. The heavy boardroom doors swung open. Magrette walked in, dressed in a sharp, tailored navy suit. She looked like a queen stepping onto a battlefield. Behind her walked Honoré Senga, carrying a massive, heavy briefcase, and 2 federal agents in plain clothes. Philippe's smile vanished. "What is this? She has no right to be here. She is my wife, and she holds a proxy to my shares for this meeting," Campbell stated coldly, leaning back in his chair. "Proceed." Magret. Magret didn't look at the board. She looked directly at Philippe. You wanted to talk about fraud, Philippe. Let's talk about the Luxembourg accounts. Let's talk about the phantom shipping containers logged in Rotterdam over the last 48 months. Honoré slammed the briefcase onto the table and began passing out thick dossiers to every board member. Oswald Rising turned pale. He lunged for his own files, his hands shaking. This is slander. These documents are fabricated. They are bank certified. Honoré piped up, grinning like a madman. And cross-referenced with your personal IP address, Mr. Rising. You really should use a better VPN. The boardroom erupted into chaos as the directors read the summaries. Millions of dollars, siphoned off systematically to accounts controlled by Suzanne Nascimento. Suzanne jumped up from the gallery. This is a lie. Philippe, do something. But Philippe was frozen, staring at the hard evidence of his ruin. The arrogance was completely stripped away, leaving only a terrified, pathetic man. Campbell stood up, buttoning his jacket. He looked down at his brother with absolute zero pity. Karma is a difficult concept for people like you, Philippe. You think you are untouchable because of your name, but you forgot one thing. Campbell moved to stand beside Magret, taking her hand in front of the entire board. You went after my family. The federal agents stepped forward, producing badges. Philippe Duhamel, Oswald Rising. You are under arrest for corporate fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. As the handcuffs clicked around Philippe's wrists, he looked at Magret, his eyes wide with shock. He had thought she was a pawn, a weak link to be exploited. He never expected the pawn to checkmate the king. As the enemies were led out in disgrace, the boardroom sat in stunned silence. Campbell turned to the board. Meeting adjourned, they walked out of the building together, stepping into the crisp evening air. The paparazzi were already gathering, tipped off about the arrests, but Campbell ignored them. He led Magret to the waiting car, the same car she had entered months ago in the rain. Once inside, the privacy glass rolled up. The city blurred past them. 2 years, Magret said quietly, looking down at her hands. That was the contract. Campbell reached out, gently taking her hand and intertwining his fingers with hers. He looked at her, not with the cold calculation of a CEO, but with the profound, undeniable love of a man who had finally found his equal. I'm tearing up the contract, Campbell said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't want a transaction anymore, Magret. I just want you, for real, forever. Magret looked into his eyes, the last of her walls crumbling away. She squeezed his hand, a tear escaping down her cheek. I think I can agree to those terms. Sometimes, the universe delivers exactly what we need, disguised as something we merely settled for. Campbell sought a business transaction. Magret sought mere survival. Yet, through the fires of betrayal and the venom of arrogant enemies, they discovered something infinitely more valuable, an unbreakable partnership and profound love. Karma inevitably catches up with those who build their lives on cruelty and deceit, just as it did for Philippe and Suzanne. But for those who hold on to their integrity, even in the darkest alleys of life, the reward is sweeter than any stolen fortune. If this story of resilience, unexpected love, and satisfying karma resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who loves a good plot twist. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more epic, emotional stories. Remember, your past doesn't define your future, and sometimes the best chapters are the ones you never saw coming. See you in the next one.
Hi, my name is William Sunny, the owner and manager of Iron Cowboy Gardena. After watching the video, he needed a wife, she needed a home, neither expected the rest mother the child needed. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was how Margaret and Campbell both entered the arrangement carrying loneliness in completely different ways. At first, everything between them felt cold and practical, but little by little they started seeing the pain and strength hidden beneath the surface. I think the story quietly reminds us that trust usually grows slowly, especially for people who've been hurt before. Do you think Campbell would have changed if Margaret hadn't challenged the world he was living in? And which moment made you feel like their relationship had become something real instead of just an agreement? In everyday life, I think it's easy to judge people by appearances or by their past without understanding what they've survived. Sometimes patience and honesty can completely change the direction of a relationship. If this story meant something to you, feel free to leave a comment, like, or subscribe. I always enjoy hearing your thoughts and seeing which moments connected with you the most.